Justice, rule of law versus ruled by law. We stand at a unique precipice in history where the very definition of justice is being challenged by the siren song of subjectivity. We are told that systems of law are merely cultural preferences, subjective narratives, no better or worse than any other. But the cold, hard data of history and the empirical reality of global migration tell a different story. Justice is not a preference, it is a technology. And like any technology, some versions work and others lead to systemic collapse. The idea that justice is a human invention, and as such, subjective narratives, no better or worse than any other, is being challenged not only by history, which I will elaborate on later, but also by primatology and behavioral economics. Research suggests our sense of fairness is actually an evolutionary trait designed to maintain cooperation within a group. Let's delve into a few landmark studies along with the biological context. The most famous version of the experiment in that regard was conducted by Frans de Waal and Sarah Brosnan using brown capuchin monkeys. Two monkeys were placed in side-by-side transparent enclosures where they could see each other. They were asked to perform a simple task: hand a small stone to the researcher. Monkey A received a piece of cucumber for the task. Monkey B received a grape, a much more highly prized treat, for the same task. When the first monkey saw its partner getting a grape for the same effort, it became visibly indignant. In many cases, the short-changed monkey would take the cucumber, sniff it, and then throw it back at the researcher or slam it against the floor. They preferred to have nothing rather than accept an unfair reward. Chimpanzees and pro-social choices. Chimpanzees have been shown to engage in pro-social behavior, where they can choose between two tokens. The egoistic token: only the chooser gets a treat. The pro-social token: both the chooser and a partner get a treat. When given the choice, chimps overwhelmingly choose the pro-social option, especially if the partner is patient and reminds them, without being aggressive, that they are there. Rats and empathy-based justice rats have been observed skipping a meal to help a distressed cage mate. In one study, a rat would choose to press a lever to release a trapped companion rather than press a lever that delivered chocolate. Often, once the friend was freed, the rescuer would even share their chocolate with them. Another experiment is known in behavioral economics as the ultimatum game. This tests our biological reaction to unfair distributions of resources. The proposer is given a sum of money, e.g. $100. They must offer a portion to the second player. The responder can either accept the offer, both get the money, or reject it, neither gets anything. Rational choice. Logically, if someone offers you $1 out of $100, you should take it. You are $1 richer than you were a minute ago. The human reality. Most people reject offers below 30%. Biologically, we are wired to punish cheaters. By choosing to receive nothing, the responder is paying a small price to punish the proposer for being greedy. This ensures that in a social group, the proposer thinks twice before being unfair again. The takeaway. For social animals, unfairness creates friction. Friction destroys cooperation. Without cooperation, the group and the individual is less likely to survive. Justice isn't merely a cultural concept, it's arguably a biological imperative. This drive is linked to our fundamental cognitive process, the search for meaning through cause and effect thinking, which often leads to attributing goals to natural concepts, even though thinkers like Hume and modern physics suggest we should focus on patterns rather than purpose. Not able to explain the injustices of the real world, we invented the final judgment concept, where all misfortunes and unearned harms will be corrected. Despite the biological foundation, the concept of fairness, like other human behavioral proclivities, is highly flexible and susceptible to cultural molding. It can thus be shaped into models that serve society for better or worse, a phenomenon clearly observable through historical and comparative analysis. The concept of justice shifts dramatically depending on whether it is managed by a decentralized group, honor culture, or a centralized authority, the state. The primary difference lies in who owns the grievance and what the goal of punishment is. In honor cultures, often emerging in environments where central law enforcement is weak or absent, justice is personal and reputational. Justice is not sought through a third party. The individual or their family must extract it themselves to prove they are not weak or easy targets. It often follows the eye for an eye philosophy. A slight against one person is a slight against the entire kin group. The goal isn't necessarily rehabilitation, but the restoration of the victim's social standing. If you don't retaliate, you lose your honor, which in these societies is a tangible asset for safety. In systems with centralized authority, the state claims a monopoly on the legitimate use of force. Justice is shifted from a private matter to a public one. When a crime is committed, it is viewed as a violation of the social contract or the peace of the realm. At the core of state-based justice is impartiality. Justice is, theoretically, executed by a neutral third party, judges, juries, to prevent the tit-for-tat cycles common in honor cultures. The focus shifts toward standardized rules, evidence, and proportional punishment defined by written law rather than emotional satisfaction. Most societies moved from honor-based justice to state justice as a way to stop the cycle of violence. Historians and sociologists generally observe a three-step process in this evolution. Phase A. The Wehrgild, blood money. To stop the killing, the state or a tribal council introduces a system of fines. Instead of killing the offender, the victim's family is paid a specific amount of currency or goods. This compares the value of a life to a price tag, effectively turning a hot emotional conflict into a cold legal transaction. Phase B. Centralization of power. As monarchs or governments grow stronger, they declare that the king's peace has been broken. By claiming that a crime against an individual is actually a crime against the king, the state gains the right to intervene. This removes the right of the family to seek private revenge. Phase C. The monopoly on violence. The final stage is reached when the state becomes the only entity allowed to use force. This is supported by institutionalized police, a professional force that replaces the posse or the kin group. Courts that provide a neutral arena for disputes, making personal retaliation unnecessary and eventually illegal. While the state system is more stable, the honor impulse still exists in subcultures where people feel the state fails to protect them. The Greek logic and the Roman code. The software of our civilization was coded in the Mediterranean. It began in ancient Greece, where justice, dikaiosune, moved from the whims of gods to the realm of logic. Plato gave us the ideal of harmony, but Aristotle gave us the spark of the rule of law, arguing famously that the law should govern. Before the philosophers stepped in, justice was viewed as themis, divine command. If a king made a ruling, it was thought to be whispered into his ear by Zeus. This made justice unpredictable and often cruel. As Greek city-states polis grew, they needed a system that didn't depend on whether a god was having a bad day. They sought dikaiosune, a form of justice rooted in the moral order of the community. Plato viewed justice through the lens of functional excellence. In his work, The Republic, he argued that justice isn't just a set of rules, but a state of balance. In relation to the individual, justice is achieved when your reason, spirit, and desires are in harmony. On the state level, justice is achieved when every citizen performs the role they are best suited for, overseen by philosopher kings. The flaw of Plato's justice was its top-down character. It relied on perfect leaders making perfect decisions, which is a lost gamble in the real world. Aristotle, Plato's student, took a more pragmatic approach. He realized that even the best leaders are prone to passion, bias, or exhaustion. This led to his revolutionary pivot. The law should govern, not the men. This resulted in the concept of distributive justice, giving people what they deserve based on their contribution to society, and corrective justice, righting the scales when a person has been wronged, regardless of their social standing. Aristotle also introduced the concept of the rule of law. He argued that a written code provides a level of dispassionate reason that no human can maintain consistently. He who bids the law rule may be deemed to bid God and reason alone rule, but he who bids man rule adds an element of the beast. Aristotle. The Greeks were theorists. The Romans were engineers. The Roman Republic transformed abstract justice into a tangible infrastructure. Through the 12 tables, they ensured law was transparent, not a secret kept by elites. They invented the separation of powers and the veto, creating the first system where dynamic tension protected the individual. Before the 12 tables, 451 to 450 BCE, law in Rome was oral and interpreted exclusively by patrician priests. This secret knowledge allowed the elite to manipulate rules at will. By literally carving the laws into bronze tablets and displaying them in the forum, the Romans invented transparency. This moved justice from the abstract minds of the elite into a tangible public record. If a debt was owed or a trial was set, the procedure was there for everyone to see. The Romans didn't trust human nature to be inherently just. Instead, they engineered a system of dynamic tension, essentially a machine where the parts were designed to grind against each other to prevent any one part from taking over. They created the system with the consuls, 2 leaders, not one, who served only 1-year terms. The Senate provided the theorist side, wisdom and foreign policy. The assemblies represented the engineering side, the people's will. The veto, Latin for I forbid. This was the ultimate emergency brake. A tribune of the plebs could physically stand in the way of a law to protect a citizen, turning a legal theory into a physical act of protection. The Romans viewed the law much like they viewed their aqueducts. An aqueduct is useless if it's just a drawing. It needs a specific gradient to move water. A law is useless if it's just an idea. It needs a specific procedure to move justice. By creating standardized court procedures and the right of appeal, provocatio, they ensured that justice wasn't a feeling, but a predictable result of a repeatable process. When the Republic fell and power centralized into the rule of men under the later emperors, the economy stagnated. Property rights became property permissions. This is a historical law. Economic success is a trailing indicator of institutional health. When the checks and balances were hollowed out, Rome didn't just lose its soul. It lost its ability to innovate and defend itself. The collapse of the Roman Empire ushered in centuries of decline across numerous fields: philosophy, urbanization, architecture, medicine, and the justice system all experienced a significant regression. To understand why the medieval system felt so dark compared to the Roman one, we have to look at the transition from a state-based society to a relationship-based one. The Roman Republic operated on the idea of the res publica, the public thing, while the medieval world operated on the privatum, the private contract. Governance: the Republic versus the feudal pyramid. The Roman Republic was defined by institutions. The feudal system was defined by personalities. The Roman Republic should be viewed as a functional bureaucracy based on the social contract. Power was held by offices, consuls, praetors, tribunes, not just individuals. When a consul's term ended, the office remained. Citizenship: a legal status that granted specific rights, provocation laws, or the right to appeal, regardless of who your local governor was. The census: a massive administrative feat used to track every citizen, their property, and their legal standing. The feudal system, from the other side, should be viewed as the private web based on personal ties. There was no state. There was only your lord. If your lord died or changed his mind, your legal reality shifted instantly. Fragmented sovereignty: a king didn't rule a country. He ruled his direct vassals, who ruled their own vassals. This sub-infeudation meant that a crime committed on one patch of dirt might be judged by a completely different set of rules than a crime committed 10 feet away on another lord's land. In regards to criminal justice, the Roman Empire can be compared to medieval times as evidence versus ritual. The most jarring obscurity of the medieval period was the abandonment of Roman rational inquiry in favor of supernatural proof. The Roman criminal system, cognitio. The Romans pioneered the inquisitorial and accusatorial foundations we still see today with the following concepts. Burden of proof: the principle of in dubio pro reo, when in doubt, favor the accused, existed in Roman thought. Professional judges. Cases were heard by magistrates who evaluated evidence, such as signed documents, physical marks, and character witnesses. Standard of evidence. The goal was to reconstruct the truth of what happened through human testimony. The medieval criminal system. In the early Middle Ages, if a crime was not obvious, the court stopped looking for facts and started looking for God's judgment, Ledictum Dei. This era saw the practical application of such inventions as trial by fire. The accused would walk over hot coals or hold a red-hot iron bar. The wound was bandaged and inspected 3 days later. If it was healing cleanly, God had vouched for their innocence. If it was infected, they were guilty. Trial by water. The accused was bound and thrown into a pond. Ironically, since water was considered a pure element, if the person floated, the water was rejecting them, guilty. If they sank, they were innocent and hopefully pulled out in time. This was obscure because it removed the human element. A judge didn't have to think. They only had to observe a wound. The Middle Ages also featured a legal landscape that feels bizarre to the modern mind. Justice wasn't just about maintaining social order among humans. It was seen as a way to restore the cosmic balance between God, nature, and society. Animal trials. In a world where every creature was part of God's hierarchy, animals were often held legally accountable for crimes. If a pig killed a child or locusts destroyed a crop, they weren't just seen as pests, they were seen as defendants. Secular trials typically involved larger animals, pigs, bulls, horses that had caused physical harm. They were imprisoned, provided with lawyers, and if found guilty, publicly executed, often by hanging, to serve as a warning to other animals and their owners. Church trials. These targeted swarms of insects or rodents, locusts, rats, weevils. Since you couldn't put 1,000,000 grasshoppers in jail, the church would issue a formal summons. If the pests didn't show up to court, they were excommunicated or formally cursed. These trials weren't just about revenge. They were a way for humans to assert control over a chaotic and often terrifying natural world. Witchcraft. While witch hunts peaked later than most people realize, 1450 to 1750, the medieval period set the stage by linking folk magic to diabolism. The idea that a witch's power came from a literal pact with the devil. Originally, accusing someone of witchcraft was risky because if you couldn't prove it, you were punished. Later, legal manuals like the Malleus Maleficarum, Hammer of Witches, shifted the burden of proof, making it easier to convict based on spectral evidence or forced confessions, searching for the devil's mark, pricking the skin to find spots that didn't bleed or feel pain, which were supposedly where the devil had branded his servant. Heresy, holding beliefs that contradicted church doctrine, was considered a spiritual infection that could condemn an entire community to hell. The Inquisition was established to find and convert heretics, like the Cathars or Waldensians. It used a formal inquiry process that prioritized confession above all else, frequently with elaborate torture machines like breaking wheel, Jada's cradle, thumb screws, rat torture, Iron Maiden, or blood eagle. The church itself did not execute people. They would find the person guilty and hand them over to the state, which would then carry out the execution, often burning at the stake, to purify the soul and protect the public. The evolution of law isn't just a list of rules, it's a reflection of what a society values most, whether that is the stability of the state or the purity of the soul. In the Roman Republic, the law centered on the citizen. It was an individualistic system, where rights were tied to one's legal status within the city-state. Contrast this with medieval feudalism, where the individual essentially disappears into a web of dependency. You weren't just a person. You were a vassal or a serf, defined entirely by your relationship and obligations to the person above you. How did we decide who was guilty? The Romans used a method we'd recognize today: cross-examination, witness testimony, and written documents. It was a secular, intellectual pursuit of facts. The medieval world took a more supernatural approach. Truth wasn't found by men, it was revealed by God. This was the era of physical miracles and divine signs, where a defendant might walk over hot coals or reach into boiling water, trusting that the heavens would intervene to protect the innocent. When a law was broken, the remedy looked very different. Roman Republic. Punishment was a vertical transaction between the state and the offender. You paid a fine to the treasury, you were sent into exile, or the state executed you to maintain public order. Medieval feudalism. Justice was often a horizontal transaction. We see the rise of wergild, or blood money, where the offender paid the victim's family to prevent a blood feud. When the body was punished, it wasn't just for retribution, but for corporal purification, suffering on earth to save the soul for the afterlife. Ultimately, these two systems were aiming for different stars. The Roman system was obsessed with maintaining the Pax Romana, the Great Peace. The law was the glue that kept a massive, diverse empire from collapsing into chaos. In the feudal world, the goal was maintaining honor. In a society built on oaths and face-to-face promises, a breach of law wasn't just a crime, it was an insult. Justice was the mechanism used to restore the standing of the parties involved. The citizen versus the subject. The Roman example. In 70 BCE, the orator Cicero famously defended the rights of citizens against the corrupt governor Verres. He highlighted that a Roman citizen, regardless of where they were in the world, could utter the phrase, civis Romanus sum, I am a Roman citizen, to claim the protection of the law and immunity from degrading punishments like scourging. The feudal example. Legal identity in the Middle Ages was sealed not by a birth certificate, but by a physical ritual. A vassal would place his hands between the hands of a lord and declare, I become your man. From that moment, his legal truth was tied to his lord's protection, not an abstract state. In the Roman Empire, every year, a Roman judge, praetor, would issue an edict explaining how he would interpret the law. The goal was predictability. If the law was predictable, commerce could flourish and the Pax Romana, the peace of the Roman world, could be maintained. In the medieval times, when two nobles disagreed and there was no paper trail, they turned to the trial by combat. The logic was that God would grant strength to the party whose honor was intact. The winner didn't just win a case. He proved his moral standing before the court and God. Interestingly, the medieval system was often less lethal than the Roman one for minor crimes. Because there was no strong state to build prisons, they used wehrgeld, man price. Every person had a literal price tag based on their rank. If you killed someone, you didn't necessarily go to jail. You paid their family their market value. It was a cold, mathematical way to prevent endless blood feuds. The rediscovery of Roman law was a pivotal, intellectual explosion that fundamentally reshaped European governance and education. Here is how it unfolded. For centuries after the fall of Rome, most of Emperor Justinian's massive legal codification, the Corpus Juris Civilis, was lost to Western Europe. Around 1070, a complete manuscript of the Digest, the most important part of the collection, containing the opinions of Roman jurists, was found in northern Italy, likely Pisa or Amalfi. This Littera Pisana manuscript made its way to Bologna, which quickly became the epicenter of legal study. A scholar named Irnerius began teaching the text systematically around 1088. This marked the birth of the first modern university. Because the Roman texts were ancient and difficult, scholars known as glossators developed a specific method of study, the gloss. Teachers wrote marginal notes, glosses, between lines or in the margins to explain definitions and resolve contradictions, the accursion gloss. Eventually, a scholar named Accursius compiled nearly 100,000 of these notes into the Great Gloss, which became the standard reference for lawyers across Europe. Students flocked from all over the continent to Bologna to learn this learned law, ius commune. When they returned home to France, Germany, or Spain, they served as high-ranking advisors to kings and popes, established law faculties at other new universities like Paris and Oxford, integrated Roman principles like property rights and contracts into local customary laws. Roman law provided a sophisticated written framework that helped medieval rulers centralize power and manage the growing complexities of trade and urban life. The journey from Roman legal principles to the modern Bill of Rights is a fascinating evolution of might, being slowly replaced by right. While it wasn't always a straight line, the core Roman concept of jurisprudence, the idea that law is a science based on justice, provided the DNA for Western constitutionalism. English barons forced King John to sign the Magna Carta in 1215, widely considered as the first major step toward constitutional law. They effectively repackaged Roman ideas of justice to restrain a monarch. Clause 39. This is the most famous link. It stated that no free man could be imprisoned or stripped of rights except by the lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land. This transformed the Roman idea of rule of law into a practical tool to stop a king from being a tyrant. It established that the law is a power independent of the person wearing the crown. Fast forward through centuries of power struggles, and we reach the English Bill of Rights, adopted in 1689. This document took the vague liberties of the Magna Carta and turned them into specific, enforceable statutes. It prohibited the king from suspending laws without Parliament's consent. It reinforced Roman and medieval concepts of habeas corpus, the right to be brought before a judge. The U.S. Bill of Rights, 1791. The American founders were obsessed with both Roman history and English common law. They saw the Bill of Rights as the ultimate fulfillment of the Roman res publica, public matter. The 5th and 14th Amendments, these directly echo the Magna Carta's law of the land by using the phrase due process of law. Codification. Just as the Romans insisted on the 12 tables being displayed in the Forum, the Americans insisted on a written Bill of Rights so that the government's limits were clear and unchangeable. The Renaissance rebooted the Roman code, but the Enlightenment added a critical upgrade: universality. We moved from civis Romanus sum, a privilege of the few, to the inalienable rights of the many. Thinkers like Locke and Montesquieu realized that for a society to thrive, justice must be objective and predictable. This led to the creation of the most successful economic engine in history. The Industrial Revolution did not happen in Great Britain or the US by accident. It happened because of intellectual property rights and contract law. In a rule of law system, a merchant can sue a nobleman and win. In a rule by law system, like in medieval kingdoms or modern autocracies, the law is merely a tool for the state to control the population. The rediscovery of Roman law during the Renaissance wasn't just an academic exercise, it was the recovery of a logical skeleton for justice. When Enlightenment thinkers began drafting the blueprints for modern liberal democracies, they reached back to the corpus juris civilis to find principles that could restrain the whims of absolute monarchs. Let's invoke a few examples of foundational Roman rules as they function as the bedrock of our current legal systems. The protection of the individual. These rules ensure that the state cannot use the law as a surprise weapon against its citizens. No crime, no punishment without law. This is the soul of legal certainty. It dictates that you cannot be punished for an act that wasn't explicitly illegal at the time you did it. It prevents creative prosecutions by the state. The law does not operate retroactively. Linked closely to the above, this ensures that new laws only look forward. If you bought a blue car yesterday, the government cannot pass a law today banning blue cars and then arrest you for yesterday's purchase. When in doubt, rule for the accused, the ancient ancestor of innocent until proven guilty. If the evidence is ambiguous, the tie goes to the defendant. It acknowledges that it is better for a guilty person to go free than for an innocent person to suffer. The integrity of the process. These rules define natural justice, the idea that a trial must not only be fair, but must look fair to any rational observer. Let the other side be heard also. No one should be condemned without a chance to defend themselves. This is the origin of the right to due process. You have a right to face your accusers and tell your side of the story before a judgment is rendered. No one should be a judge in their own cause. This is the foundational rule against conflicts of interest. It ensures judicial impartiality. If a judge has a personal stake in the outcome of a trial, they lose the moral and legal authority to preside over it. The responsibilities of the citizen and state. These rules balance the rights of the individual with the stability of the legal order and the safety of the collective. Ignorance of the law is harmful. While it sounds harsh, this is a pillar of social stability. If I didn't know were a valid defense, the law would become optional. It places a duty on the citizen to be aware of the rules of the society they live in. The safety of the people republic shall be the supreme law. Often cited during emergencies or wars, this rule suggests that the ultimate duty of the state is its own preservation and the safety of its people. In modern liberal democracy, this creates the tension between civil liberties and national security. These principles shifted the world from a system of rule by law, where the king uses law to control people, to the rule of law, where the law is a cage that controls both the people and the king. Fast forward to contemporary times, and one of the most convincing theories on how modern liberal democracy should be organized is the veil of ignorance. It is a thought experiment proposed by the philosopher John Rawls in his 1971 book, A Theory of Justice. Imagine you're tasked with designing the rules for a brand new society. You get to decide how wealth is distributed, what rights people have, and who gets the best opportunities. The catch? You have no idea who you will be in that society. The veil of ignorance is a mental device used to help us determine what a truly just society looks like. Rawls argues that our personal biases, our race, gender, wealth, and talents cloud our judgment of what is fair. To find objective justice, Rawls asks us to step into the original position, a hypothetical state where we are stripped of all knowledge about ourselves. Behind this veil, you don't know your socio-economic status. Are you a billionaire or living in poverty? Your natural abilities. Are you incredibly athletic or do you have a disability? Your demographics. What is your race, gender, or religion? Your personal values. Are you a risk-taker or someone who seeks security? The easiest way to understand the logic is the I cut you choose rule for sharing a cake. If you have to slice a cake but don't know which piece you'll receive, you'll cut them as equally as possible to ensure you don't end up with a tiny sliver. Rawls believed that if we designed a society from behind the veil, we would naturally choose two main principles to protect ourselves. We would ensure everyone has basic equal liberties, like freedom of speech and religion, because we wouldn't want to risk being part of a persecuted minority. We would allow for inequality only if it benefits the least advantaged members of society. For example, we might agree that doctors should be paid more because that high pay ensures we have good doctors available, even if we end up being the poorest person in the system. Rawls' experiment is a powerful tool for policymaking. It forces us to ask, would I still support this law if I were the person most negatively affected by it? It shifts the focus from what is good for me to what is fair for everyone by stripping away the me entirely. No one knows his place in society, his class position or social status. Nor does he know his fortune in the distribution of natural assets and abilities, his intelligence and strength, and the like. John Rawls. If you do not know if you will be born rich or poor, male or female, a member of the majority or a marginalized minority, which system would you choose to enter? Would you choose a system where guanxi, political connections, determines your legal success? Or would you choose the Western framework of checks and balances, where an independent judge protects your rights even against the president? The answer is written in the footsteps of millions. People do not flee toward autocracies. They flee toward the refuge of reason found in the West. This is the ultimate empirical evidence of the supreme character of this model. Now, let's discuss the so-called middle income trap. we observe that even nations which do not observe objective rules of justice can develop as long as they benefit from cheap labor. You can build factories with cheap labor and centralized command, but you cannot build a Silicon Valley without the rule of law. Innovation requires risk. Risk requires trust. Trust requires a court that cannot be bribed. Nations like South Korea and Taiwan escaped poverty precisely because they pivoted from rule by man to a robust, independent judiciary. Conversely, nations that treat property as a gift from the state inevitably hit a ceiling of corruption and brain drain. When we talk about the rule of law, we are talking about a world where the rules are written in stone. In this Western model, contract enforcement is objective and predictable. It creates a level playing field where the smallest startup can hold the largest corporation or even the government to the letter of the law.